Hey, what's up, everyone? Pastor Mike here. Can I ask you a huge favor? Would you take 30 seconds to rate and review this podcast? If it's been a blessing to you in your spiritual life, you can take that little step that's going to help us reach more people and connect them to God's amazing grace. Thanks so much in advance for your help, and God bless.
I mentioned yesterday that John chapter 10 is known as the Good Shepherd chapter because it's where Jesus spends a lot of time talking about how wonderful it is that we are his sheep and he is our good shepherd. And that's wonderfully comforting. There's an interesting conversation that Jesus had with a group of people in the middle of the Good Shepherd chapter. I'm going to read some of that conversation to you. Starts at verse 22 in John chapter 10. It says, "Then came the festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. The Jews who were there gathered around him, saying, 'How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly.' Jesus answered, 'I did tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me, but you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice.'" Okay, and so they started by asking Jesus a very important question. They wanted to know if he was the Messiah, and the reason why that was an important question was because of the promises related to the Messiah. The Messiah was the one who was supposed to come in and fix everything that was broken. He was supposed to come in and save the day. God had been promising the Messiah since the Garden of Eden. And boy, they were looking forward to him. For the same reason you and I just love to look at the Messiah, because it's the one who's supposed to fix everything. Now, you should know something about this group that was talking to Jesus. When they asked him, "Are you the Messiah? Tell us, we want to know." They were actually asking the question sarcastically. They didn't really care how he answered the question because they didn't believe that he was the Messiah. They didn't care how he answered it, but I bet you do. Because as we've been talking about this week, you have real vulnerabilities and we have real pains, and we want to know for sure if what he says is really, really true. But, he looked at this group, and Jesus, he pointed out something that was so important. He said, "You know what? I actually did tell you. I actually did tell you the truth." And then he pointed out, "I've even done wonderful miracles to show you that I am really from God. I've done things that nobody else can. But," he said, "you didn't listen. You didn't listen." And because they didn't listen, and because Jesus said that one of the important characteristics of my sheep is that they listen to my voice, he was able to definitively look at them and say, "You are not one of my sheep, because you do not listen." And that might lead some to ask the very important question: how do you really know that you are one of Jesus' sheep? Because obviously not everyone is. Do you listen when he says you don't need to worry about anything? Do you listen when he says you don't need to be afraid? Do you listen when he says that he has great plans for you and you can trust him? Do you listen when he says you're forgiven? Do you listen when he says that in his Father's house are so many rooms and he's already gone to prepare a place just for you? The reason he tells us to listen is not only because in his word he gives us such awesome guidance for what we're supposed to do in our lives. Every time we listen to his voice, it really reminds us of the same thing in so many different ways. That you're going to be okay. All his promises are promises of love, promises of protection, promises that you are being watched over by your Father in heaven. I'm going to share with you of something that has become very useful to me in my life and in my ministry. There was a time in my life when I was really struggling with something, full of anxiety, full of worry, and I didn't know what to do or how to feel about it, and it was really getting me down. And I was talking to a friend on the phone, and he said, "How are you feeling right now?" And I said, "Well, I feel really worried. I feel really afraid, and for so many different reasons." And then he said, "I understand." And then he paused and he asked me this question. He said, "Which passage in the Bible are you thinking of right now where God gives you the right to feel that way?" And I thought about it. And of course, there are none. There are no passages in the Bible where God says, "Oh, you better be afraid." But there are so many where he says, "You don't need to be afraid." There are no passages in the Bible that God says, "You should be really worried about your life." But there is one where he says, "You don't need to worry about your life or anything in it." There's no passage in the Bible where God says, "You're not forgiven." There's so many assurances that you are. It's an interesting, and it's become a very useful tool just to ask yourself, does God give me the right? Does God give me the right to feel at peace? Does God give me the right to feel confident? Does God give me the right to feel full of joy? Does God give me the right to feel loved and forgiven? We look at the cross of Jesus, and the answer is, well, he sure does. We have the right to believe those things, and that's one of the great ways that we are cared for by our Good Shepherd and our Father in heaven.